And just like,
Hey, Brian.
hey, Happy New Year, John.
2022.
I yeah, somebody was talking about the fact that this is year number 3 of living with this pandemic, and it hit me like, wow, I didn't think about things that way, but certainly these are different times. I raced here this morning, having to get a COVID test before I could travel this weekend, and it's a whole new world, just a whole new world.
Well, it's an opportunity to make lemonade out of lemons.
Yes. Yeah. You can't see it, but I have shelves full of lemonade.
Yeah. And, if you're a virologist or a molecular biologist, it's happy days. A lot of
It is happy
demand.
days. It is happy days. Any travel up for you here, John?
Well, I was in New York over the holidays with my kids,
Oh, nice.
heavily masked, but, we saw 3 Broadway shows, we ate out, we did everything that you have to do in New York. And we did it aware of a slight risk premium, but, everybody's fine. Nobody got sick. We observed very stringent public health procedures. And it made me confident that, with the right precautions, the chances of getting sick are, uh, manageable.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I hope everybody appreciates that observation. It's just learning to live with this and being proactive and diligent about protecting yourself and others. I mean, it's really at the end of the day, it's really what it's about. And we're all one. We're all one. And the fact that we're divided over this is well, it's a conversation for another time. But
Indeed.
with that said, I look forward to catching up with you personally to hear about what you saw out there. That's where I'm going this weekend is New York. Not that I'll have time for anything, but I do love that city, and I want to welcome everybody who's tuning in. Welcome. Intersections is our community. So please remember, as we're talking, share where you're tuning in from. Some of you have already started to do that, so being proactive, appreciate it. Share where you're tuning in from. Share your questions, your comments, your observations. Fred, good to see you. Thank you for your comments in email here recently. I did share them with John, and it's something that we're always working on. And our first guest is ready to go. So let me just do the official intro, and then John, I'll turn it over to you to welcome Martin. So with that said, hey, Intersections. Thanks for joining in. Our weekly show is dedicated to a conversational jam session, just rocking and rolling, jazz, improvisation, that we dive deep into the intersections among technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. Every episode, we bring diverse personalities, worldviews together, and the greater understanding or the greater seeking of understanding and unlearning. My co-host and co-founder, John Kao, has been called Mr. Creativity and a serial innovator by The Economist, and certainly that is probably just the beginning of it. He's a thought leader, entrepreneur, advisor. He's played a prominent role in the fields of innovation and business creativity for over 30 years. One of the things that I promised John we'd talk about at some point this year is his latest thought leadership around the 6 intelligences. And if it's one thing that I've learned, is that when you can put together something so profound, it doesn't just become a speaking topic, but it becomes a movement. And that is something that we want to dive into deeper in 2022. He's taught at Harvard Business School. He served as visiting faculty at MIT Media Lab and Stanford. But most interestingly, he is a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage. He wrote the best-selling Jamming: The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. And he has not one, not two, but 3 grand pianos right in front of him. And he is a master musician. John Kao, welcome to Intersections.
Hey, Brian. It's great to be here, and it's great to be showered with your introductions. It's one of the more enjoyable aspects of doing the show. Let me try to reciprocate by saying that my erstwhile partner, Brian Solis, has been a tireless pioneer exploring the territory defined by digital innovation since the pre-digital era, shall we say. So how digital relates to innovation, to marketing, to reputation building, to corporate strategy. These have been the topics of his thought leadership, his books, his keynotes and his day job, which is being the global evangelist for innovation at Salesforce. And I'm sure all of you have seen his footprint out there, which is a very big one. So it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, John. That's awesome. I love that. I love that. And I am really excited about our first guest. Backstage, you mentioned you were a fan of his work, and I didn't get a chance to tell him that, but hopefully he hears this, that I'm also a big fan. And his new book is super exciting. So why don't I bring him up? And John, you do the honors.
So Martin Ford, a futurist, a New York Times best-selling author, visionary with regard to AI, robotics, Silicon Valley entrepreneur, TED diva, I guess I could say. 3 million views of your TED talk, and clearly influential and followed by major news outlets throughout the land. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the show, Martin. I've been tracking your work as best I can, and now to be able to speak to the source, that is a real pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I guess we could jump right in and ask a really basic question, which is, where are we now in the whole AI phenomenon in relation to AI and humans, in relation to the linkage between the software side and the actuator side in terms of robotics? What do you know now that you didn't know before when you were beginning your journey of writing these books and looking into this more deeply?
Well, I started this process. I wrote my first book really before the emergence of deep learning as really the primary technology that's kind of become the driving force behind all of this. So my sense is that obviously we've made a great deal of progress since then. Arguably, it's been, I wrote my book about more just over 10 years ago. So this has probably been the most consequential decade in the history of artificial intelligence, I would say. But nonetheless, my sense is that we're still in the infancy here. You know, that there's a lot of progress ahead, maybe, you know, decades and decades of progress before we really begin to see the true implications of these technologies. But nonetheless, it's already having a dramatic impact, and that's something that I expect to accelerate in the coming years and decades for sure.
And where do you see the major impacts currently? I mean, if we kind of extrapolate from where we are today to a landscape, say, even 5 or 10 years from now, what do you think is going to change the most?
Well, in terms of the impact on employment, which is the thing that I've really focused on primarily, I think any kind of routine, predictable activity is increasingly going to be susceptible to automation. And that will include what we would think of as blue collar activities. In other words, you know, the kinds of jobs where you're physically manipulating the environment, and that would involve robots. But it will also definitely, maybe even more so, impact a lot of white collar activities or intellectual activities that are more routine in nature. And you know, many of these jobs might be jobs that require certainly university degrees, even beyond that, graduate degrees. A lot of very highly compensated, high skill work that's performed by people is in fact essentially predictable in nature, and that's going to be increasingly susceptible. So I definitely see a big impact there in terms of the kinds of jobs that are susceptible to this. But then, of course, beyond that, there's an entire range of other impacts on society from artificial intelligence in terms of both the positive, the fact that this is a technology that's going to be utilized, I think, to kind of jumpstart innovation, to drive scientific progress, because it's going to be perhaps our most important tool for innovation and creativity. And then, of course, there are a whole range of risks or downsides or potential concerns associated with AI, which we can talk more about. So I believe it's becoming a systemic technology, and it's probably going to ultimately be the most disruptive technology that we've ever created.
So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about the specific impacts on creativity and innovation. Obviously, those are topics of great obsession for me. And I agree with you in principle, but I'd love to drill down to some of the specifics. I mean, aside from making information at different levels of sophistication available to humans to, eliminate a lot of the drudgery of innovation in terms of finding out about stuff or finding out about novel stuff, or I guess harnessing what used to be called the wisdom of the crowd, or the wisdom of the collective. I mean, how do you see it actually devolving down to specific practice in terms of enhancing creativity and innovation?
I think the most exciting story that we've seen so far from artificial intelligence is probably the announcement that DeepMind made just, I think, over a year ago with their protein folding system, right? This is a problem that scientists, biochemists have struggled with for 50 years. The idea that you could take the genetic sequence to make a protein, and from that be able to determine the actual configuration that a protein molecule folds into, right? Because it's the shape, the geometric shape of the protein molecule that actually determines its function. So this is incredibly important for biochemistry, for medicine, for science in general. And this is a problem that, again, had been a 50-year undertaking with very limited success, but within about 2 years, 2 iterations through their system, DeepMind was able to essentially solve this problem. I mean, it's been a revolution in science. And we now, as a result of that, they are now creating essentially a catalog of the shapes or configurations of all the protein molecules that are important to medicine and also to other organisms. And this is going to have enormous implications going forward. So this is, I think, maybe the first really important instance where we've seen a company like DeepMind, which has previously focused on games, right, like Go and chess and so forth,
Yes.
and have amazing, very spectacular successes there. But nonetheless, they're still just games. But now they've really taken it, and for the first time, they've repurposed that into the real world in a way that obviously has major implications for innovation and creativity. And that's, the most dramatic example, but you're seeing, for example, dozens of startups spring up that are utilizing artificial intelligence to search for new drugs, new therapeutics.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what, new materials, new kinds of, substances that are useful in many ways. So you're already beginning to see this. And I think we're just at the earliest stages of this.
So it sounds like those use cases are about amplification of human abilities to go through large numbers of possibilities to find the ones that are relevant, right? So in the case of protein folding, you could imagine millions or billions of combinations, and deep learning allows for the kind of scanning of possibilities that humans with paper and pencil or human tools couldn't do. I'm wondering if there are other applications that are about novelty, that are about discovering something that is more in the realm of what the pundits would call disruptive innovation, coming up with things that are unexpected, and whether that's within the purview of the kind of technologies that we're talking about.
Well, I mean, that is a part of this. I mean, if you go back to, again, DeepMind and the work they did with AlphaGo and AlphaZero on Go and chess, one of the takeaways from that is that when that system approached these games, it was in essence an alien intelligence, and
Mm-hmm.
the best players in the world of those games looked at the results of that and were in many cases struck by the fact that the machine was playing in a game that was playing these games in ways that human beings never had before, and as a result of that, they've developed new insights. So I mean, it's at some level you can say, well, it's all pattern recognition. It's sifting through data. Yes, but it clearly already is generating new insights. Things that human beings have never really contemplated before. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. And of course, there is also a path here toward more general artificial intelligence, where increasingly, I think in the future, we will see AI systems take on the kind of reasoning and creativity that we more generally associate
Right.
with the human mind.
So what's then left for humans? You know, if the trade space for human activity is increasingly able to be substituted by technology, what is left in terms of uniquely human skills? I mean, what should we be teaching in schools, for example, if our robot overlords are going to be better at us at, you know, a lot of current professions and things of this kind?
Right. I mean, it kind of depends on the timeline that you're looking at. And what I talk about when I try to address this question is, you know, for the foreseeable future. In other words, for, you know, the next couple of decades at least, what are we looking at? And I think, as you just said, I think that AI is primarily going to be a tool that amplifies human creativity and innovation for the near future. So I think if you're doing a genuinely creative job, coming up with new ideas, thinking outside the box, whether it's new legal strategies or scientific innovations or whatever, then AI is likely to be a tool that amplifies what you're doing. So it's actually going to make you, you know, more powerful in what you're undertaking. The other areas that I think are relatively, you know, safe from full automation in the near future are jobs that require a lot of interaction, relationship building with other human beings. You know, again, yes, machines are getting better at that. I mean, there are chat bots, for example, that are already providing, you know, kind of rudimentary mental health counseling, this kind of thing. So you do see AI moving into these human areas for sure. But nonetheless, I think it's going to be a long time before we have machines that can truly build a meaningful relationship with another person. And there definitely are jobs and activities that really require that. And they're going to be, I think, a relatively good match for the technology and relatively safe going forward. And then a third area is what we would call skilled trade jobs, the kind of jobs that really require lots of mobility and dexterity and problem solving skill in a very unpredictable environment. Think about an electrician, a plumber. It's going to be a very long time before we can build a robot that can do what an electrician or a plumber does, right? I mean, that would be C-3PO from Star Wars or something.
Mm-hmm.
Which is still really science fiction at this point. So in the near terms, these are the kinds of activities or occupations that I think are going to be relatively safe or unimpacted by these technologies, or maybe even, you know, you may be in a position to do even better as a result of these technologies. But if you're doing something fundamentally routine and repetitive, you know, if you're working in an Amazon warehouse doing those fulfillment type jobs, the robots are going to get better and better, and eventually they're going to encroach on the activities being done there. And it's the same thing if you're sitting in front of a computer, cranking out the same report again and again, or the same presentation again and again. And all of that is clearly going to be more susceptible to automation. And it's going to be a lot of jobs. So this is going to be, I think, a real adjustment that we're going to have to make. We're going to have to figure out how to navigate through this transition.
You know, there's a philosophical question too. I do a lot of music, and I mean, let's take the example of dumping all 800 of Stephen Sondheim's songs into an AI, and then instructing it to make the 801st hit song. And let's say that it's a great song. Should we care as humans?
I think so. If we enjoy the song, if the song or the music touches you in some way, I mean, you know, there's obviously a debate here. Some people would say that to create art is something that is inherently human, and that a machine can never imbue that creation with the kind of feeling or emotion that a person would. But the reality is that we already have systems that have been used in just the way you suggest. I mean, there are AI systems that create new symphonies. There are AI systems that can, you know, paint works of art. And people will look at these, and in many cases, it's not, you know, it's not clear that this was created by a machine rather than a human being. So if in fact the result is put in front of you and it has an impact on you, if you enjoy it, you draw something from it, then I would say that counts.
There's a very interesting short science fiction story called Virtuoso by Herbert Goldstone. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's worth looking at just because it exemplifies this very issue. You know, a robot works in the house of a pianist and expresses an interest in learning how to play the piano, and by the end of the day is playing Beethoven's Appassionata sonata so well that the maestro, you know, is in tears. And then, you know, at the end, well, I won't give away the ending, but there's an interesting question about where the line is and how we should really be thinking about these more artistic activities and what it means for the rest of us as humans. But I will take that interesting philosophical question and throw it over to my colleague Brian here, because I know he's got a bunch of questions, and whether he chooses to stay philosophical or get more tactical, I leave that up to him.
I don't know which way to go, but what a fascinating conversation. I could follow along. I almost forgot that I was going to have to ask you questions, Martin. I just right before the show shared a really interesting article that talked about how with this sort of great resignation that we're seeing here in the last couple of years, that the radical acceleration of automation and AI is leaping companies by years in terms of where they originally planned to adopt these technologies. And so I wanted to hear, like, maybe this is a philosophical question. From your point of view, we have human beings who are saying, I just am done with this level of work, and I'm going to take this moment in time to upskill or reskill. So they're resigning en masse. And then you have the adoption of AI and automation tools, machine learning, RPA, that are sort of taking over some of these jobs. You have robots that are being adopted by restaurants who are being used in a service capacity. So curious to hear from you what executives at businesses of all types should be thinking in the balance between the technology they're adopting and how they handle the existing workforce and what they need to be doing to groom the future workforce.
Right. I think clearly businesses need to embrace artificial intelligence. I think that's obvious now. I think that ultimately it's going to come to be viewed almost, you know, at the level of a human resource, you know, in the same way that you have a human resources department to manage all the people in your organization and make sure you're maximizing that talent. AI is going to become essentially another form of intelligence within your company that also is going to need you know, specific management and optimization. And so probably you're going to need top executives, you know, an AI focused senior executive to make sure that you're utilizing this technology throughout the organization. But, you know, absolutely, this is going to bring real challenges in terms of, you know, navigating this line between what's human and what's machine and how they interact. One of the implications of all this automation is that a lot of, you know, current jobs are certainly going to disappear. And it's not, one thing that is clear is that it's you know, it's not so much about jobs disappearing, it's about tasks disappearing within organizations. Mm-hmm. Many of the activities that people are doing are going to become automated. And as a result of that, the lines between jobs are going to be completely redefined, right? So that you know, certain roles are going to disappear and new roles will emerge. But the new roles that emerge may require entirely different skill sets, different personality traits, you know, different in every way, maybe in different geographical locations. So it may be that a lot of the opportunities that disappear and then are you know, other things reappear, the same person is not going to be suitable for that. So that's going to create real challenges, both I think for companies and for society. And I think you know, that's going to be a primary focus. But and just to say, it is clear that you know, to play off the name of your show, this pandemic is intersecting with artificial intelligence in very unpredictable ways. Obviously, I've been writing about this for a decade. I never anticipated that we would have massive labor shortages as we have now. But that's one of the ramifications of the pandemic. And clearly that is accelerating this move to automation in many areas. And as things normalize in the future, and as the workers that have left the workforce temporarily because they've had more financial support, or maybe because they're sick, eventually they're going to come back. And but all of this automation is not going to go away. So I do think that we're going to get back on that trend line where all of this becomes more a greater impact on the employment level.
Yeah, well, to say the least, I was just reading a tweet that somebody sent that said, I don't know that it'll be robotics driven. I think it'll be robotics supported, a more empowered workforce supported by better technology. And so, in this aspirational sense of man and machine collaboration, someone's going to see, like you said, on the front lines, what are the things that we need from a human workforce in every capacity. Who do you see is going to be connecting the dots, or is it a human or a machine? Back to our institutions, building on a question that John asked, back to our institutions, our universities, our schools, to in real time essentially re-engineer our academic programs to help students come into a world where they are not, let's just say, not outdated the minute that they graduate.
Right. I mean, that's a real challenge. As far as I know, there isn't any entity that's really focused on that or has control over that. There certainly are people at the universities talking about this, but again, I think that it comes down to what I said earlier about focusing on things like creativity, like team interactions, working with other people. These are probably the skills that are going to be most relevant going forward. You definitely don't want to go to university and make a major investment to essentially learn a school that or learn a job that is all going to be about routine information manipulation, right? Because that's the kind of thing that is likely to disappear. So I do think that it's going to take a lot of effort on the part of individuals and also institutions to make sure that we redirect people in the right way. But the other thing I worry about is that not everyone in our society is going to be well equipped to make these transitions, right? If we're going to say that a lot of jobs in the future really require very strong people skills and certain personality traits and so forth, and not everyone is going to be a good match for that. So we also need to consider our social safety net, and this is one of the reasons that I've talked about someday having a universal basic income to really support to make sure that everyone has at least a minimal living standard, even as we go through this transition. So there are going to be a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, that is a separate conversation unto itself, because there would be those who would just by their very nature oppose that without actually understanding why we're proposing it and why we might actually need it, until they're on the other side of a pink slip and have to learn the hard way. But one more question, because we're running out of time, and that is, let's get to creativity for a moment, because I think that's something that we can all embrace in our own lives sooner than later. I remember a wonderful TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson about how creativity is taught out of us in school and our work environment. Up until this point, for the most part, we learn more linear thinking. We learn how to operate more hierarchically. What would be your advice to executives, academics watching now, in some of the things that we can do as our own individuals to embrace creativity starting today?
Well, I think that it's in many cases a personal endeavor. I mean, focus on activities that really lead to thinking outside the box. Try to avoid getting into a rut where you're sitting in front of a computer doing the same thing again and again. If you're an executive in a company, then you want to make sure that you're offering opportunities to your employees to move away from that. That everyone has at least some time to focus on more creative endeavors. I mean, at Google, for example, I think everyone spends 20% of their time focused on things beyond their normal work role. These kinds of programs perhaps would be very useful. maybe some sort of coursework that really focuses on getting people to think in creative ways might be very positive. But it's not an easy challenge because it's not clear what creativity is. Is it something that can be taught to people, or is it a inherent talent? Is it something that's intrinsic to individuals? I mean, how much can you do to make a person more creative? And that's, I think, one of the challenges that we're going to run into as this becomes increasingly important.
Yeah, that's well said. That's probably a good place to transition. One thing that in my work that I coming off my last book, Life Scale, was whether or not we're artists in the capacity of a Van Gogh or a Mozart is one thing, but just even the mere exercise of, like you said, embracing new routines and behaviors, opening yourself up to, for example, creative exercises, no matter how well you do in them, just the practice of doing these things tends to have a wonderful sense of neuroplasticity and rewiring yourself to be more open-minded, to show up differently, to question things, which all in their very own way tend to break others out of their routines just by seeing you operate differently, by being contagious in terms of that new energy that you're bringing to the table. So, Martin, what a pleasure. John, I'll turn it over to you to say our goodbyes, but just what an honor to have you here with us, Martin.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I just want to point out to our audience that it's people like Martin that are really lighting the way stations of understanding, and I think it's invaluable to maintain an awareness of what Martin and others are doing, because this is all being written in wet clay. It's moving at warp speed. It has unknown outcomes, and they affect all of us. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and we look forward to staying in touch with it.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's a really good conversation.
All right.
Thank you, Martin, and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
All right. Well, speaking of creativity, our next guest is already backstage, and I'm just going to get a few tabs lined up as I'm also operating as producer and engineer here today. I'll run a quick bio, and then I'll bring her up. Her name is Nancy Duarte. I'm proud to say she's a longtime friend. She's just so inspirational. She's officially known as the storyteller of Silicon Valley. She's the CEO of Duarte Inc. She's the author of, I think, 6 best-selling books. Just a master visual storyteller. And I'll let her kind of fill in the gaps while I figure out all these buttons and bring her up here. There we go. Nancy.
So good to see you, Brian. And I have not met you, John. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. Wow. So I'm just going to let you fill in some of the blanks. Nancy, tell us about Duarte, and then also tell us about what's the latest thing you're working on, and I'll just jump in from there.
Awesome. So yeah, we've had a business here in the Silicon Valley since '88. So we're 34, going on 34 years old. So what we do is we have 2 different services we offer. So we can be your presentation consultancy. So we've worked with the biggest, best brands in the world and help you get ready for the stage. So we'll write, produce, or help you deliver your most important talk, or we take the findings for having done that for the most powerful people in the world, and we've also turned it into training so you could do it yourself. So you either work with us or you learn from us, is how it rolls. And it's fun. We are growing in spite of the pandemic, made some counterintuitive moves, which for some reason I tend to do when there's a crisis. And I'm working on a beautiful new body of work. And Brian, you've been a prolific enough author to know that sometimes when you're working on something, it's fizzy and sparkly, like that scene in Willy Wonka with the fizzy lifting drink. You just it's so amazing. And so I'm working on a new body of work, and it's terribly titled as a working title, but it's the 4 types of stories leaders need to tell. And it's so fizzy and fun. I'm having a good time. Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited. Storytelling is it's one of those things that I think gets lumped in with just general marketing, but it really is it's an art and a science. I share the story of how when I was working on my book X, which I was trying to what's the future in X, I was working on at the same time, and I was trying to transcend the concept of a book for essentially to bringing a mobile app onto paper, so that it could be dynamic and tell stories in a way that just wasn't left to right as a traditional book, that could mimic more of an app. And I remember hiring Nicholas Sung, who's a storyboard artist, or was, with Pixar Disney, and everything I thought about storytelling, here I was like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. It's going to be visual. It was to use your word, counterintuitive. It was it's very humbling. And so the fact that you're going on 30 plus years of really helping a group that, especially in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, before you even get to the biggest brands that you work with, tends to get mired in the speeds and feeds and the geekery of all of those things, and to really translate it in a story. You've helped in many ways make Silicon Valley what Silicon Valley is known as. And so I'd love to hear from you. What are the challenges that you see in all of the mediums that you work on, especially since we have no shortage of them today? What are some of the common mistakes that executives make when they go to tell their story?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been interesting because the most powerful and the most beloved brands use story well. And so one of the biggest questions I get all the time is, I can't get my executive to embrace storytelling, and yet we know it's really important. So a really good example, like, some people think, well, what does story mean? And we worked with an exec who had stepped into a new company, been there a while, and his employees basically were like yawning, like they were just like, we just are having a hard time getting behind this guy. So we were like, you need to tell a story. And the nature of a story is, there's this likable person. So there's this likable CEO, right, who encountered roadblocks. The middle of the story, we call it the messy middle on purpose, because you had a roadblock, you had a trial, you had something that tested your character, and you made the right decision and you overcame it. In the third act, you overcame victoriously. Well, he didn't want to go there with the messy middle. The problem is, leaders don't want to say, hey, I'm likable but flawed, and let it kind of hang out there, And that's what the problem was. So we coached this leader, CEO of a massive public company, and he showed up at an all hands meeting and was like, hey, when I first got here, kind of made a mistake, did this tiger team thing, made a big bet, thought it was our future, and it failed. Sorry. I mean, it was, a little more, he used to show up like patting his back, being self-congratulatory. He got a standing ovation, and all the content was the same. The only difference was this kind of self-effacing story, which they needed to hear, because he came across as very proud and always talked about his other company, and all of that stuff. So it's easy. It could be as simple as that, or it can be the kind of story that makes people believe they want to come and work for you. In this great resignation, it's really important to have a reason why your employees and your customers wake up, their feet hit the floor. They might walk in their home office, but they're making a choice to turn on the computer and be at your company or not. And story is a binding agent. So one of our values is to belong. So this concept of that an organization through story can create a place where people feel they belong. We've not had, my organization's not seen a great resignation. And I think it's because we focused on wellness, story, belonging, and create meaning. Like, the organization creates meaning, which is going to be very important for every organization moving forward.
What you're describing is so much bigger than story, right? A story becomes sort of the manifestation of that soul, of that essence of the why. I remember I wrote something after being inspired, which was something along the lines: the community is much more than belonging to something. It's about doing something together that makes belonging matter. And that's sort of that campfire, magic that we all choose to be together someplace, for something, and that we all choose to head in a certain direction. I think a lot of organizations miss that. They might go through this exercise of creating a vision or a mission statement, but really the soul of a company is its culture. And this story is an expression of that heart and that essence. And how much work have you gotten into, just out of curiosity, to hear your side of this? When when you go through this, do you see that undercover boss moment where an executive says, "Wow, we have a lot of work to do inside of our organization to build that sense of belonging, and this was
Right.
just the beginning of a whole new endeavor."
Right. That's there's like a crisis of meaning is what you're kind of poking at. I love the concept of the magic that happens around a campfire, because like the campfire has been replaced with the projector bulb. Like it's just not. People aren't getting the same kind of effervescence that you get around a place where you're communally joining in a place for the sole purpose of creating bonds. And that's one of the types of stories in my new body of work. It's like a bonding story is more important for a culture than people think. Because a lot of times a leader is like, well, a story in service of what? A story in service of growth, a story in service of market share, a story in service of stakeholder. No, it's a story. It's a story and purpose of binding hearts and minds together. So your campfire magic, I would describe it the way Emil Durkheim did, which is communal effervescence. And it's this thing missing in organizations today. It's that sparkly, like I was saying, right? The fizzy lifting drink that makes the ride worth it. And so I think you're nailing it, and you're sensing the same thing. I think everyone right now is sensing is this a void. There's a void.
Yeah, like what's the meaning of all of this, and what's my role in it? And is this, great resignation? Is this control alt delete moment my time, to find,
Yeah,
my
your
sense
own
of,
bliss.
yeah, exactly, my own bliss. In fact, in
Mhm.
my research, uh, for Salesforce, what we've been finding is that not only has the consumer in general become digital first, but they've become consciously or subconsciously conscious, meaning that they're paying more attention to the things that they didn't think about before, like what are the values of an organization,
Mhm.
what is its sustainability plan,
Mhm.
how do they treat their employees, things that they might not have considered otherwise. But also, one of the things I thought about you as we were preparing for today's show, this unsung form of storytelling through the visualization and the mechanics. So, for example,
Yeah.
because we have gone into this digital first world, how are we thinking about the warmth of a digital engagement? How are we thinking about the language we use, the visualization we use, the
Mhm.
user experience design? Because, for example, some of the initial research coming out of this radical acceleration to digital is that on one side we have transactions. So, can we facilitate this? Like buy online, pick up in store, versus can we make that special? And Brian, over at Airbnb, one of the co-founders, spent this last year and a half sort of trying to answer that question and diving into the world of user experience, because studies are starting to show that that's what people are missing from a lot of this, and that there is, I hate to even say it, but I'll say it for all of those folks who ask the ROI question. The When you invest in this, the return is incredible beyond
Yeah.
just transactions, loyalty, the community, the magic. And so I'd love to hear, how are you working with companies that are, I could tell you in my experience is not really thinking about this, but are you seeing that they're thinking about this, or are
Yeah.
they open to thinking like this?
Yeah, I love that people are like, well, what's the ROI of all this? So there's measurables, right? There's measurables, clicks, purchases. But the brand strength is actually in the immeasurables. The immeasurables. How did it make me feel? And how do you track that? Like net promoter score is great and all, but like, oh, it gave me the chills. I felt awe. I felt charitable. I felt safe. Like how do we measure that? And it's immeasurables. And when you think about, so we're kind of experts in the spoken word, right? How do I know that when I spoke to you, Brian, you got the chills, you felt, you had a cathartic moment? It's so hard. It's almost impossible to measure. So as an organization, it's like, how do we measure? Well, we know that the brands we've worked with are the highest performing brands in the world. I mean, by far, bar none. And we've been with most of them since their inception. Well, can we take credit for that? Probably not. Do we know that when people sit in a room, when there's humans from that brand in the room and they get all the feels? Yeah. Can we take credit for a lot of that? Yeah. Can we measure that? No. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because we know the impact we've had. We get the stories, we get the anecdotes, we get the increase in the bump in sales. So I think, I wish, is meaning measurable or is it an immeasurable? I wish there was a way, and maybe we'll get there. I thought the previous conversation was fascinating. Can AI measure, how people are feeling? No, there's some haptic and different things happening, but that's a good question. So it's on our minds all the time. Like we've had these crazy ideas like, well, what if before people walk in the room, there's this abacus, a huge abacus, and people say, do you feel this way or this way? And they put it how they feel. And then they come back and then they move their little bead. And then we're like, oh, people were transformed from that. It's just so hard without making it feel intrusive to see what they felt or believed before they heard this thing and how they felt or believed right after. But it's a real thing. I mean, we definitely know and have been in the room when all the feels are happening, and it's real because of the communal effervescence, and you can feel it in the room. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't even have an answer for it. It's
But
smart.
I think that's it though, right? It's like is what you just described, the the fizziness or the vibe or just that sensation. Did you feel it? That's what an experience is, right?
Yeah.
Did it did it touch you, and what's the story you tell yourself about that experience? And the more powerful, anything that goes beyond the ordinary, if you have a decent experience with anything, it works, it's all functional, whatever, that is forgettable. And that's the
Yeah.
thing is that we don't we tend to measure like, hey, it worked, but not, was it remarkable or extraordinary? Because that's what
Yeah.
people will feel and that's what people will remember. But I do want to be mindful of John's time as well. So thank you, Nancy. John, I'm going to turn it over to you to take this one home.
Well, great to meet you, and
Yeah.
lots to talk about. So one thing I'd really like to get a handle on is what the essence of your approach and your magic beans are with regard to visual storytelling. I mean, clearly, a lot of what I'm seeing on the website is visual, and you're not just trafficking in words, but visual is as visual does, right? And
Right.
we know that visual is from Howard Gardner, is a different form of intelligence. I've been working with graphic recorders and facilitators for 25 years. I use a lot of visual media. What's the essence of your approach to visual storytelling?
Yeah, I love that. So it's, we're kind of against visuals for visual's sake, to the
Right.
point where I love that you're going through our website. We're like thinning and streamlining and revisualizing, conceptualizing our own way we represent ourselves in the market. But we have what's called the Duarte method. It's 3 legs of a stool with a binding agent called strategy around it. So there's story, visuals, and delivery. And so visuals are not ever in isolation for us. It has to be a vehicle for the delivery of content. And so I would say that's our philosophy, and that it's not ornamentation. It's
Mhm.
clear. It's swift at understanding. Because if I can see what you're saying, we're aligned. So when we say the word visuals, like one time we had a massive world conglomerate come, and the head of India was going to come and ask the CEOs for $100 million budget, and they were like, "We need 5 slides. Hi, Duarte, we need 5 slides because I need to persuade for 100 million." We were like, "You're going to be sitting in a room across the table from this guy, and you're going to put slides between you and him." We're like, no, 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 let us shape a conversation for you. And we taught him how to draw. I go, just grab a piece of paper off his desk and draw, or turn around right on the whiteboard and be animated, be in his face, and draw these 2 diagrams right here and right here. And he called back and was like, "How much budget do you want?" That was a blast. So it isn't necessarily like slick, lickable. It's clear, and influential. And then when you draw it on that piece of paper or project it on a slide, let other people say, oh, that's not the way I see it. I see kind of like this. And it becomes also an alignment mechanism when you're getting to a place where you're ready to publish this graphic or whatever. But the ability to say, let's surround this, what I see in my mind's eye. Let you help me shape that so that we agree that this is what we're all building our meaning around, or this is where we're headed, or this is what our organization does. Visuals are just potent. They're just so clear and crisp and potent and packed with so much information when they're done well.
What makes a visual influential? I mean, I love that word.
Yeah, it's like the right visual at the right time. It could be something like, you're talking, and you're delivering a message around a concept, and then a concept no one in the room thought of projects up on the slide, and everyone gasps because it's like, oh my God, I get it. That's hysterical. Or oh my gosh, I see what you're saying. Anything that brings clarity, anything that brings traction are all, and anything that aligns, I would say,
Mhm.
are all graphics that are influential. I think all of us were looking for a graphical representation of COVID and
Of
its
what?
impact of COVID, of this
Of COVID.
pandemic, right? Yeah, and yet it's taken a long time for anyone to actually get to a place where we can visualize with clarity and feel like it's a single source of truth.
Mm.
That will be a very powerful graphic when that one's developed.
Well, that's an interesting point, though, because we're in this era of intractable division, right?
Yeah,
And so you're sounding very optimistic about the power of visual communication to bring people together, but people are not coming together.
yeah.
I mean, do you think this toolbox is going to help us resolve some of the divides that seem really here to stay?
You know, I do think the number one global problem we're trying to solve is communication. So being in that space makes me feel optimistic that my business is going to be around for like ever. So I do think that we have a massive communication problem. And I do think if we could all agree to the right data set is the biggest thing. Like one side dips in one data set and visualizes it the way they feel compelled. The other dips in another data set, visualizes it the way they want. Like I've been wanting for so long to make a site where you've got news from two different places and you point to the shared
Right.
truth, or like, because they're I spend a lot of time really reading deeply, and you can see the truth woven, and you can see the spin, you can see the bias, but you have to read both sides to get to what could be a potential shared truth. I'm in a authors group with Brian, and someone said at one point in time, that the demise of our civilization happened when the share and the like button were invented. It created divisiveness. So even in my own culture, like incoming people, everyone thinks they have a right to dissent. Like anything you say or do, it's like, I dissent. All of a sudden,
Mhm.
everyone thinks they get to dissent no matter what. So
Right.
it
Kevin
is
McCarthy.
yeah, there's a new nature, and someone posited that we may not be under a shared narrative with a shared sense of belonging for like a millennium. And I was like, wow, it might take us that long to repair the rifts and come up with a binding agent and a binding Uber narrative that brings us back together. And it made me feel hopeless, and it kind of made me hope, because now I've set out like, let's set a goal to do it faster than 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, it
interesting.
sounds like they should fly you to Geneva to negotiate between the Russians and the Americans right
And
now.
I'll come with one simple picture and it'll solve all the world's problems.
Exactly. I can't wait. Well, no, I'm with you about the power of visual facilitation to create
Yeah.
clarity. So, apropos of storytelling, you mentioned that your internal project was developing the four types of stories, or the four archetypes of stories. And what can you tell us about that work without revealing,
Yeah.
your secrets?
It's funny how quickly people latch onto things when you share things. So we've built like a 2 by 2, like every
Mhm.
classic you should be able to organize anything into a 2x2. But if you have your organization on one side and individuals on the other, this is for leaders to tell stories, right? You're either influencing the organization or you're influencing individuals. And then there's this real power in the fact that you're either connecting or you're transforming. So filled into that is you have reasons to believe stories, reasons to bond stories, reasons to hope stories, and reasons to grow stories. And that's kind of finite. Like I'm having a hard time finding stories that are outside of that. So this new body of work, I'll have my own stories as I've grown as a storyteller, as a leader, as the spine. And then I've curated other stories that support the model. It's really, really beautiful. Because the kinds of stories I'll tell, like if I'm having cocktails with you, John, and you're stuck, I could pull it. If I'm a leader who's really self-aware and understands my own trek into leadership, I should be able to whip out a story over cocktails with you if you're struggling with something and say, oh, I dealt with that. Listen to my narrative. Do what I did. Or, oh my God, I did that. Listen to my narrative. I screwed up. You have motivating tales and warning tales. And we should all have a pile of them that meet the same finite ways that you're going to get stuck, or our direct reports are going to get stuck, or our customers going to get stuck. And so if we do like a little inventory of the stories and then shape them, just really quickly shape them in the shape of a story, it's a really powerful way to influence and create human flourishing, which is, I think, everyone on all sides wants ultimately human flourishing. We just all think the way to get there is different. And as leaders, the pressure with the kind of devolving of politics, the devolving even of religious institutions and all of that is putting a lot of pressure on leaders like us to show up and create this void. Like we're supposed to fill everyone's void in their heart. It's hard to do, but I think story and storytelling is a good way to at least have a real nice binding agent that bonds people to the meaning and the purpose of your organization.
Well, no doubt. I mean, in my own kind of pediatric practice, I've worked on the story for national government, for the story for a branch of our military, the story for new products. And the thing that I find is that leaders, by and large, are terrible at storytelling. And assuming they even acknowledge that it's important, their concept of storytelling is, meager at best. And
it's fragmented.
Why do you suppose that is? And what is the source of resistance? I mean, they go to movies and they read books and so forth and so on. And, they were kids once and loved stories. So why is there so much resistance to story as something that's legitimate?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? They know it means you have to feel, and it means you may have to show that you have feelings. And I think people are like, oh, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to be an automaton. I'm not going to feel. I'm just going to get my job done. And I think as we come out of this productivity and we treat all our humans as units of production and be productive, get the work done, we're past that. Like we're past that now. And so now people do want to feel at work. It's like there's a new era that's happened where they're like, I do want to be bonded, I want my coworkers to be my friends. I do want to have drinks with them after work, And so the shift has happened, but I think it's gone a bit unnoticed by some leaders. Actually, I would say most leaders, and they don't know how to do it. So I loved what was being said in the previous talk about, creativity. And he was saying, and Jeff Weiner has said it when he was CEO of LinkedIn, the thing that AI will never replace is communication and creativity. And so I think what's happening is we're all having to ratchet that up, not down. And people have higher expectation of how they're expecting people to present because of Inconvenient Truth, because of TED. Like we don't think it's okay for someone to waste an hour of our time with a really crappy talk, so
20 minutes.
Yeah, I know. That's what TED did, right? They do 3, 6, and 9-minute talks now because people don't want to sit through a crappy 18-minute talk. So people need to bring their A game, and that's not going to stop. And the people that are rising in the org, the ones that learn to communicate well in this season, in the next decade, they're going to move faster than the ones who may have had the actual technical skills to do the jobs better. The ones that are better communicators are going to rise quicker.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the post-industrial age,
Exactly.
right? So it's a new ball game. Well, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to kind of toss it back to Brian to close things out. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so could I, Nancy. It was a wonderful Wonderful pleasure and a gift to have you on the show. And as you get closer to announcing this body of work, we'd love to have you back.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited about it. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you. We'll see you soon, Nancy. I'll see you
Okay.
in email too.
Yeah.
Bye. Oh man, she's amazing. What an amazing conversation, as always. John, excellent line of questioning. Everybody, thank you for your comments and your participation. I couldn't flash all of them, but I do see that you're also talking to each other, which is wonderful to see out there. John,
Yes,
as
sir.
always, what a pleasure. A new year, a new variant.
A new variant. That's right.
a new prospect. This might be the year where we switch from pandemic to endemic. So a lot to be excited about. Like you said, finding the silver lining. John, take us out. Take us out this week with some words, and then I'll load up and queue up you taking us out with some music.
Well, we're already 4% into the new year, so time flies. But it's always nice to have an opportunity to practice beginner's mind.
That is true. What is the famous quote in a beginner's mind? There are many possibilities. In an expert's mind, there are few.
It's actually in the expert minds, there are many opinions. In the beginner's mind, there are no opinions, and therefore all new things begin with beginner's mind.
Lovely. Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone. And with that said, John will take us out with a little improv.